Welcome in everyone and welcome to the Cup of Tea channel. So April 2nd is when we're going to have our hands on with the PTR, and they've just released all the notes that we need to know what to expect when trying out the PTR. This is the public test run where players can actually try out the content early before the actual main release of Season 4, which will be May 14th. For some people, this may be their first time ever actually trying out a public test run. Just bear in mind, these are all the changes coming in that are not fully completed. This is not what it's going to be like on release. There may be many changes applied. Probably not the whole itemization itself, but in terms of like class balancing, way that some items work and the way we kind of have to farm resources for certain things, anything that we may feel that needs improvements upon, this gives us a fantastic opportunity to actually relay it back to the Diablo 4 team to then hopefully have all these changes applied for when the actual full release of the season is. So now to actually get onto the PTR, once it does go live from April 2nd, you will need to have the Battle.net app on your PC. This is the only way you'll be able to actually get onto it. Once you upload it and go over to the Diablo 4 tab, you'll notice it will say live on the bottom left of the screen. Simply click this tab here and then it will actually come up with the PTR option. Select that and then just enter game and then you're ready to get started. And now we move into the actual PTR notes itself. I've done a video covering the Campfire Chat which talked about all the features coming along the way, and I've broke that down into a quick 20-minute video. So if you want to check that out, I'll put a link of it in the description. But they have actually added some more information to the notes. So I want to quickly brush over what that is, but also look into the actual class changes. Is actually the main aspect of what I want to do in this video. So let's get right into things. So obviously we have the basic item updates in which they've reduced the actual number of affixes that roll on legendaries down to 3 and rare items down to 2, with a smaller pool of potent affixes, so you won't be seeing as many of the unwanted stats on your items anymore. But in return, we are getting some additional new affixes and positioning of the affixes, such as resource per second, resource on kill, lucky hit, apply vulnerable, life per hit, and basic skill ranks. And then with miscellaneous updates, legendary items drop from enemies 95 plus will always guarantee you a 925 item powered legendary. Gems have been a lot more simplified, as well as providing you with core stats such as strength, intelligence, dexterity, and the more conditional bonuses have been more simplified. They've also applied changes to the way that you craft and salvage within the game. So for example, with material removal and consolidation, when it comes to your crafting of elixirs, you had to gather some specific herbs to be able to craft that. They've now grouped them all together into a resource known as common herbs. So that's going to help you save time in terms of gathering the right resources to make your items. In addition, item rerolling gold cost has been capped when enchanting, so you're not having to get vast amount of gold just to get that one potential reroll. And then forgotten souls can now be obtained from whispers and are now a global rare drop from elites as well. Uniques are also going to be a lot more common when you're playing the game, because worlds tier 1 and 2 you're going to actually start seeing some of the uniques dropping. When it comes to world tier 3, all uniques will drop. And then when it comes to actually uber uniques, when you defeat a monster of level 55 plus, there is now a chance for one of these uber uniques to drop, and they will roll 925 item power. We now go over to the new crafting systems that are coming along the way into the PTR. The first one being tempering, in which you can add affixes onto an item depending on the quality of item. So if it's ancestral, you can roll 2 new affixes onto the item using the manuals. Once you've collected a manual, it will work very similar to how the Codex of Power works. It will have a category in terms of what stats it will offer, but in addition, you will have unlimited amounts of usage for it. Each manual has a handful of affixes which you can offer, and then obviously you are limited to the amount of times you can roll it depending on the temper roll limit. And this is a good time to link into the Codex of Power as well. So this time it is being changed the way it actually functions. So rather than extracting an aspect from an item, having to reserve it and then have that one-time use, this time around, whatever aspects you collect and extract, it saves that highest version possible, and you have unlimited uses of that variant. And depending on the item tier of the legendaries, such as normal, sacred, ancestral, the higher quality it is, the higher those affix rolls will be. And whereas beforehand the Codex of Power had a handful of legendary aspects, this time around every single aspect is going to be within the Codex of Power. So this is going to be quite a lot to search through, but luckily they have actually implemented a manual and keyword search, so finding those legendary aspects that you need will be much more easier to locate. We also have the introduction to greater affixes only appearing on ancestral and unique items. These are a more powerful version of the normal affixes you would get on your items, but these will roll with a 1.5 times multiplier on the affixes maximum roll. And to let you know as the player of when these items have rolled greater affixes, it will actually give you a unique audio cue, but as well display a Roman numeral next to the item name on the floor indicating how many affixes are actually rolled greater. Now moving on to the final crafting system being introduced, and that's all to do with masterworking. This is a late game crafting system to allow you to upgrade your items using the materials gathered from the pit. This has a total of 12 ranks, and each rank will give you a slight stat increases on all affixes, but every 4th rank a single affix will actually receive a massive upgrade. And even though that 4th rank is rolled random on an affix, this can actually potentially roll on the same one every time. And you may be worried through masterworking you may not get the rolls that you were wanting. Does that mean the item's completely useless now? No, they did mention in the campfire chat that you can essentially retry it again, but you're just going to have to gather the materials once more. And this is a good segue into where to obtain these masterworking materials. Well, you've got to complete something known as the pit. This is very similar to how Greater Risk worked in Diablo 3, in which when you slay enough enemies and summon a boss, if you manage to do it in the timer, you were then rewarded. For this case, you are given the masterworking materials. If you don't reach the timer, you will not have access to this, but you are still receiving some rewards from it, so it's not all a complete loss. And upon successfully completing the pit, you will actually unlock the next tier, and you're actually rewarded with more tiers unlocked depending on how much more additional time you have remaining. So 4 to 6 minutes you're given 2 additional tiers, and 6 or more minutes you'll be given 2 additional tiers. The pit will actually have hundreds of tiers difficulties, so there's plenty of progression behind that. But in addition, you can do this either solo or with a party, but they've actually changed the way that the reward system works with this one, meaning that if you're the party leader of the group, you will receive the lion's share of the materials. Furthermore, the player who had opened up the pit has a chance of receiving the materials used to summon the tormented echoes known as Stygian stones. These will summon the higher and harder versions of the Uber bosses to receive those Uber uniques and higher tier rewards. Players that play in groups or parties may seem like this is a bit unfair in terms of how they reward the one player, but they definitely needed to implement something to reward the solo players, because in the end game it is very, very unfair to those players that like to play by themselves. Boss ladders will also receive an update as well with the return of Andoriel, where she will actually share the same drop table as Duriel, but the way to summon her is going to be different. So this time around you're actually going to be using parts collected from the Beast in Ice and Lord Zia, and as well with completing the pit you'll be getting your Stygian stones, and this will allow you to able to summon 200 level versions of these Uber bosses, which will give you greater rewards. And to help the player on their way to actually obtain their first Uber unique, defeating the first tormented echo drops 1 resplendent spark as a first time reward. Helltides have actually received some changes as well. Speaking of which, Helltides can now be accessible on Worlds Tier 1 and 2, but these are in a lesser form with less monster density, less roaming around, and less meteor showers. So it's more like a gentle introduction into it. And then when you hit that World Tier 3, there's some additional features that are coming along the way to make things more exciting. So we now have something called a Helltide threat, and this works very similar to back in Season 2 with the Blood Harvest event, to which if you kept slaying monsters and completing objectives, you would actually generate a threat meter. With this one, it actually has 3 tiers, and once you hit that maximum one, you become hell marked. This will actually then spawn a maximum density of enemies. This will also spawn something known as a Hellborn. This is very similar to how the Blood Hunters spawned in. They were a lot more stronger than your average minions, and these would actually drop greater rewards. Another feature from the Blood Harvest known as the Blood Ritual has now been kind of tweaked around and then implemented into the Helltides, known as the Accursed Ritual. You will need actual Baneful Hearts, which you can earn through your Tortured Gifts chest, and once you have a total of 3 deposited within the ritual, you will then be swarmed by a dense demonic ambush, as well as spawning a Blood Maiden, an immensely powerful demonic creature who will offer you great rewards upon her death. We're also going to be receiving some new uniques, so everyone will be able to have access to Tyrell's Might as well as Yen's Blessing, and then following, every class is actually going to be receiving 2 uniques. So for example, with Barbarian, when you double swing 4 times, then the next will hit for 2 additional times with more damage. Druid, when you shapeshift, you will receive 5 seconds buff, in which you can damage stack with your shapeshifting skills. Rogue, casting Flurry, has a chance to drop a stun grenade, which will give you a bonus as well as stunning. Sorcerer, casting Fireball through Fireball, will cause it to split and deal more damage. And then finally, Necromancer, when you consume your corpses, this will create mini novas and deal more damage depending how many corpses are consumed. Whilst we're on the subject about uniques, during the campfire chat they did mention about the Banished Lord's Talisman and Tibbot's Will overperforming a bit too much, so they were going to be receiving some nerfs, and in total it's roughly around a 50% nerf on both these items. This may seem quite major, but this is a good step in the direction, because this is going to allow other uniques or legendaries to perform on par, giving us a little bit more variety in terms of what items we can use. But not only in the PTR are we receiving a couple of new uniques, we also have a couple of new aspects coming along the way into the game as well, which may offer you some new options in terms of your builds. And that pretty much covers everything to do with what's to come with the PTR in terms of the features and some of the changes. We're now onto the section of where we're actually going to go over all the class changes class balances, buffs, nerfs, everything like that. So in terms of how I do this section of the video, it's going to be a little bit different. But if you want to know a bit more in detail, one, you can always read through the patch notes yourself, which I'll put a link in the description below. But we're going to quickly brush over what these changes are, because with a PTR, changes are going to be coming along the way. So anything that I'm reading right now could actually be completely different when the live service actually goes live. So I don't want to invest too much time into it. I've basically narrowed it down to what you guys should know. So let's get right into things. So to start things off with the general balance updates, we have all minions gaining 100% of the player's attributes. This includes crit as well as like attack speed, meaning minions are going to be doing a lot more damage now. So necromancers and druids are going to be rejoicing about this change, but this also affects abilities such as the Call of the Ancients for the barbarian as well. We also have skill tags updated to allow more aspects to affect more skills and abilities, meaning more stuff is going to be proccing off and synergizing with one another. And to start things off, we have the barbarian class right here. And as a barbarian main, this was actually pretty painful to get through because most of it is unfortunately going to be nerfs towards the class. Starting things off with a 10% removal of damage reduction, meaning barbarians are going to take on a little bit more damage. Nerfs to charge with a 250% damage down to 180 with the cooldowns nerfed as well. Hota has also been changed up a little bit as well. So beforehand, it was actually like a damage multiplier. It has now been actually changed to give you crit chance for every 10 fury you had actually spent. But unfortunately, crit chance actually caps at 100. So it's very limited to what it does. It can't go over that percentage. Rend and Rupture also receive some buffs with Call the Ancients as well. Kick received a buff in terms of the distance that it does as well as the damage. Expertise, which was the barbarian's like skill where you would select one of the expertise and it would give you a small bonus. Every single one has received a buff apart from the two-handed axe, which received a minor nerf. That was the one which applied the vulnerability. Glyphs as well, they had nerfs on the overpower stat, berserking, as well as the cooldown reductions. Legendary aspects have also received some buffs with Dust Devils, Leap, Double Swing, and the Kick, so we may see some of those in action soon. Overpower got nerfed for the legendary aspects. And then finally, when it comes to unique items, we have Rage of Horograph. This now does, when you bleed a monster rather than just an elite, it will reduce the cooldown of all skills rather than non-ultimates by 1 second. So that means we may see some builds where we can actually have a permanent ultimate running. So we're moving on to the druid now, and the good news is they're going to be receiving buffs all across the board when it comes to their boons, their skills, their passives, as well as their aspects, paragons, and minions as well. So some good news for druids because they have been underperforming every season, and as well they had issues with the whole leveling and spirit regen. There's been some changes in terms of giving aspects where if you killed a minion it will give you more spirit, but also the boons such as energize, it has now been increased from 10 to now 20. If we scroll down as well to debilitating roar, this has now been categorized as a shout skill. And also they've given the druids the bold chieftain aspect, which is originally just a barbarian one. Now they're going to be having the benefit of using this, which is where if you use it and there's a certain amount of enemies around, it will actually give you a cooldown reduction on those shouts as well. We then scroll to the passives and we'll use quick shift as an example here. So beforehand, when shapeshifting skill transforms you into a different form, it deals 7% increased damage. It now does instead when shapeshifting into a new animal form, you deal 1% increased damage for 3 seconds up to 6%. We'll then use another example. We'll scroll down to the paragon, and this is where they've actually just increased like the damage or the amount of critical strike chance that you get from the shapeshifter glyph from 20 to 25%. And then finally with Inner Beast legendary node, beforehand, after shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 10% for 5 seconds up to 30%. It has now been changed to where after shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 5% for 10 seconds up to 45%. If you reach 10 stacks, this bonus resets and reduces the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 5 seconds. So for druid, we're definitely going to get some variety in terms of what abilities to use, whether it's in your shapeshift form or your minion builds, something that has been asked for players for quite some time. And speaking of minion builds, we're going to move over to the king of all minion builds, and that is the Necromancer. And these have received a massive buff. Everything altogether just makes the minion builds for Necromancer going to be absolutely insane. You're going to get a lot more minions, they're going to do more damage, and the multipliers that come along with it as well, and how it all adds together, it's going to be pretty nuts. As well, they have actually improved the AI on the minions, so they're actually going to be going into the combat and fighting for you. They're not going to be waiting for you. Little Necromancer over over there to walk into the enemy. No, they're going to be on the aggressive. It's going to feel like you're having a massive undead army to help you. We're actually going to go with some changes of the Book of the Dead. I'm going to use the mages as an example. So for the shadow mages, the attacks now pierce, so they can actually hit multiple enemies. They're going to be firing out additional bolts. It says additional shadow bolts now occur every second attack after the second upgrade. Cold mages, you're going to be gaining essence on the attacks, but in addition, they're now going to apply the vulnerable condition. So for example, with barbarians, they had an easy way to apply that vulnerability effect. Not many other classes had that option. This now gives you that one. So if you want to actually have something that applies that vulnerability effect, you now can then pick the cold mages. And then finally, bone mages, they actually have a chance now, a 25% chance to cast bone splinters or a bone spear if it is equipped onto your skills.
Bone spears everywhere.
Yes. Absolutely.
Now, if you're a necromancer and don't want to fully invest into a minion build, don't worry, they've actually applied some changes for one of the skills, such as Blood Mist, where they've actually removed the movement speed punishment from it. So beforehand, if you used it, you had a 20% reduced movement speed. They've taken that off now, and there was an aspect that would allow you to do that. They've now changed that to make up for it, to which it's known as the Blood-Soaked aspect, and this will actually give you an additional 20% movement speed, so you're going to be a lot more quicker when casting this ability, meaning for your level up builds, this actually may be an option, but also for the gauntlet as well, this is going to be a great way to actually get around the zone. But not only has that aspect been changed, you've also received some buffs to other aspects for the necromancer, and if we scroll down, you've also received some glyph buffs as well, such as the Dead Razor glyph, an additional bonus maximum bonus buff to 15% multiplicative. So rogues, as they stand right now, are actually in a pretty comfortable spot. They're probably the most balanced class out of all of them. They're not going to be receiving some major buffs, but there are some functionality changes as well as some pretty small buffs to certain abilities that aren't getting used as much. So if we look at Inner Sight, whilst the Inner Sight gauge is full, you also gain a plus 25% additive critical strike chance for 4 seconds, and in addition, attacking enemies that are not marked will fill the gauge up at 5% of the normal rate, meaning you're going to be able to sustain this a lot more. Flurry received a damage percentage increase, but one of the main changes or things you may be seeing coming along the way in terms of rogue builds is all to do with the grenade skills. They're going to be receiving quite a few damage buffs. So Tricksters now additionally increases grenade skills damage by 25 to 40% with other ones such as Off Surprise and Artful Initiative. And as I was mentioning before, with the functionality changes, we're going to use Arrow of Storms as an example. So beforehand, with Lucky Hit, your marksman skills have a 10% chance to create an arrow storm at the enemy's location, dealing physical damage over 3 seconds. You can have up to 5 active arrow storms. It has now been changed to Lucky Hit. Your marksman skills now have up to a 36% chance to create an arrow storm at the enemy's location, dealing physical damage over 3 seconds. Your arrow storms now deal 25 to 40% increased damage, with the developer's note saying the maximum number of active arrow storms remains at 5. We are just removing this from the tooltip to make it more succinct. And now onto the final class, which is the Sorcerer, and a very interesting one is mastery skills are now considered core skills. So any stats that was increased damage to core skills, this is going to affect abilities such as your Firewall and Meteor abilities. Enchantments have also received some buffs and changes. Flame Shield receiving quite an interesting one. So beforehand, what it originally did was automatically activates upon taking fatal damage. This effect can only happen once every 120 seconds. It has now been changed over to automatically activates after cumulatively losing 100% maximum life, and this can only happen every 30 seconds. The developer's note says, we receive feedback from players that cheat death mechanics are not desired. The Flame Shield enchantment has been changed to not react to fatal damage, but instead react to taking 100% of your health within a 30-second window. We then go over to the skills where we receive some buffs here and there, but mainly around the Frozen Orb, where the new functionality, the travel distance, is now controllable. In addition, the damage has been buffed. And with the enhanced Frozen Orb, beforehand, when the cast above 40 mana, Frozen Orb explosion damage is increased by 40% against elites and 30% against all other enemies. It now, whilst healthy, the explosion from the Frozen Orb just deals 45% increased damage. The teleport skills have also been redesigned as well. So previously with the enhanced teleport's cooldown is decreased by 0.5 seconds per enemy hit, up to 3 seconds. This time around, it's just going to give you a 30% movement speed for 3 seconds literally after teleporting with Mystical Teleport, and this was an interesting number to see. So beforehand, for 4 seconds after teleporting, Crackling Energy hits 2 additional enemies. Pretty okay, but now it deals 500% increased damage, and it also forms Crackling Energy for each enemy it hits up to 3. So that one is going to be very interesting to see. I'm not a sorcerer main myself, but just seeing that number on ability, Pretty nuts. And rejoice to all you Hydra fans, they've actually done a small change, but a pretty decent one, where baseline maximum amount has been increased from 1 to 2, so you're going to get that extra Hydra assisting you. They've also increased other skills in terms of their damages, passives as well, in terms of what they provide. So cooldown reset chances increase, damage reduction, as well as the damage increase for shocking impact. This has now been bumped up to 100%, so doubled. If we go down to the aspects, we're going to use the of conflagration as an example. So the functionality has been changed, or additional effects have been added on. So beforehand, whilst channeling Incinerate, your burning damage is increased by 25 to 40%. It still does that in the new version, but this time it actually applies when enemies hit with Incinerate, explode, burning all surrounding enemies for over 6 seconds, and this effect cannot occur once every 3 seconds. This is actually a really decent change, because when I played Sorcerer in beta, I tried to do an Incinerate build. It was pretty weak, so this is actually a good change towards that. But the one thing I would say that they may need to look at changing is actually the problem with Incinerate. You have to channel it, you have to be stationary while doing it. There has to be some form of, you have a form of mobility, you can run around while casting it. So an effect occurs where you can keep the movement going and these effects, especially when you're doing the endgame content where you have to dodge mechanics. But furthermore, the gauntlet, this would not be an ideal skill to use, because you're wasting time having to stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. And that pretty much covers the class changes. I tried to keep it short and sweet as best I could. So any information that you want to read into a lot more, like I said, I will put a link in the description below so you can find your class if you want to fully read through the changes. But bear in mind, again, PTR changes may occur. Everything that we read there might be completely different by the time season 4 does come out. But we do have some loot updates, and I did mention this in the Campfire Chat video, where now item drops in terms of their rarity will now drop on a specific world tier. So Sacred will drop on world tier 3 and Sestra on world tier 4. Item rarity drop chances have been adjusted after level 28. The majority of 80% of gear drop that is not legendary will be rare. Additionally, chances to drop legendary items now scales more after reaching level 50, and item power now increases every 5 levels after 50 instead of on a linear scale. And in fact, we're getting 2 new elixirs coming in to the game. We have Elixir of Holy Bolts, when after killing an enemy, Holy Bolts fire from the corpse of that enemy. In terms of how much damage that does, we don't know as of yet. We'll definitely find out during the PTR. But the Elixir of Momentum, now this is going to be very, very interesting, because after killing an enemy, increase movement speed by 3% for 5 seconds, and this effect can stack up to 15 times. So if you think about that Necromancer Blood Mist build where you've already got some additional movement speed, you're going to be super fast clearing out these dungeons and gauntlets. So we'll definitely see this on the playing field, and I'm definitely going to try it out myself. And that covers everything all to do with the PTR right there. This will be dropping on April 2nd, so let me know in the comments if you're going to be partaking in the PTR. I will drop a link in the description below of where you can actually do all your feedback reports towards the developers. So any changes you may want to see, what may be working, what may be needing improving, you can actually report it all over there, because we all want to make sure Diablo 4 Season 4 goes out with a bang. We want to make sure this is a really, really good season. I'm very passionate about this game and I want it to do well. I'm going to be testing it out myself, trying different classes and all the itemization changes. But in addition, I hope you found this video useful. It was a lot of information crammed down as best I can, but I hope you took something away from it. And in addition, if you want to support my channel, don't forget to drop a comment, like, and even consider subscribing for more Diablo 4 content. I'm also going to be streaming over on Twitch as well, so you can find me at twitch.tv/Cuppa__T. And that pretty much brings us to the end of the video. Thanks again. Take care.